They're back. That's right. After a week off, we're back. And then after over a decade, Colorado is headed back to the Big 12. Our expert Carl Reed tells us how this move may just be the start. Plus, flips, fits, and five-star commits. The recruiting world packed a lot into this weekend, and we are making sure that you don't miss a move. And here's your reminder. Mike Norvell, much more than just the Portal King. He is tearing it up on the trail right now, so we head to Tallahassee to get the latest. We're also crowning a Recruit of the Weekend. All that and more as the college football recruiting show starts right now. Hello and welcome in. I'm Emily Proud. Blair Angulo has the day off, so we have some very special guests joining us in just a bit. But first, you know the drill. Submit your questions in the chat. The only way you can do that is by subscribing to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Also, please hit that like button so we know that you're watching. So you go ahead and do that. I'm going to hit these headlines because we got some big ones happening over the weekend. An Iron Bowl in July as Auburn flipped five-star wide receiver Perry Thompson from Alabama. He is the number 14 recruit in the class and number 2 player in the state of Alabama. So if this flip goes the distance, it will be the highest rated recruit early in the Hugh Freeze era, and it'll be Auburn's first five-star signee since they added Owen Pappoe back in the 2019 class. Meanwhile, Arizona found its 2024 quarterback as in-state 4-star DeMond Williams committed to the Wildcats earlier today. He is the number 16 quarterback in the class and the number 3 player in the state of Arizona. Now, he had been committed to Ole Miss, but reopened his recruitment earlier this month. Williams joins Isaiah Rushing, marking the first time that they have landed 2 of the top 3 players in state since 2005. And the recruiting wins keep on coming for the Noles. On Saturday, Florida State added 4-star offensive tackle Manasse Itete. The Cali kid had been committed to USC since the very beginning of June, but actually decommitted on Friday. Now, this was day 2 of back-to-back 4-star victories for Mike Norvell. The day before, Itete announced Florida State landed 4-star in-state corner Charles Lester. He picked them over the likes of Colorado, Georgia, and Alabama. We will head to Tallahassee a little bit later in the show. But first, we love the rivalries on the trail, and none have been more exciting than Michigan versus Ohio State. The latest win goes for the Buckeyes as OSU lands the number 1 player in the state of Ohio. That's 4-star corner Aaron Scott. The win on Sunday gives Ohio State 19 pledges and keeps them at a solid number 2 in the team rankings.
And now it's time for Fits for Big Commits.
That's right. We have told you who they are and where they're going, but is it a good match? Today we are breaking down the fits for big commits. A lot of decisions made over the weekend. We mentioned the highlights in the headlines, but let's dig a little bit deeper into whether or not these new additions are good fits. So to help us do that, it is my pleasure to welcome in our first guest. It's national recruiting analyst Brandon Huffman. Huff, a few rivalries on the trail to hit on, so let's start with the biggie. Ohio State beating out Michigan for the 4-star corner in Aaron Scott. He's the number 3 corner, staying home in Ohio. So how do you like the fit for this big commit?
Well, obviously, from just a positional standpoint, from a player standpoint, this is a huge addition to Ohio State's secondary. When they brought over Jim Noles last year from Oklahoma State, they thought that was going to shore up a lot of the defensive problems that they had. And then you go into the national semifinals. You go to the Michigan game at the end of the regular season, and defensively, they still scuffled a bit. So to keep an elite player in the secondary in state, I mean, here's a kid who picked his Ohio State shirt out of a Michigan backpack. That was big because Michigan has been ramping up the pressure recruiting-wise against Ohio State. So Ohio State gets an in-state win, but then they get it at a position of need, at a position where they could use all the extra bodies that they can get, but elite, talented bodies are going to find themselves on the field much sooner than later. And you look at their secondary, they've got some guys that are going to be draft eligible after the season. So Aaron Scott can come in and be able to play right away. He gives them that kind of body that can come in and play as a true freshman, and it's not a big leap, but it's a big victory for a school that's lost its last 2 games to its rival and a school that's lost a couple of their targets to Michigan. This was big to keep him in state, but it also just bolsters that secondary and gives Ryan Day some weapons defensively that he needs.
Yeah, pulling that Ohio State shirt out of the Michigan bag. Cold-blooded, but we love to see the rivalries trickle down to the trail. Our next commit, well, he may have made the biggest splash of the weekend. Check it out.
Beautiful years of the Auburn University.
Yeah!
Yeah, so that was Hugh Freeze getting tossed into the pool after five-star wide receiver Perry Thompson announced his flip from Alabama to Auburn. Obviously, you love the video. We all had a good time seeing that over the weekend. But how do you like the fit for this big commit?
First of all, this is just a big win for Hugh Freeze. Remember, this is a guy who caused a lot of problems for Alabama when he was at Ole Miss. There was a couple years in a row where he beat Alabama. Well, now he stays in state to get the number 2 player to flip to him, to flip from Alabama. Keep in mind, when Perry Thompson committed to Alabama a year and 2 months ago, 14 months ago, Hugh Freeze was still at Liberty. Now he comes into Auburn, and we've been saying this for years. Auburn fans want so badly to have success. They want to win. They expect to win. They demand to win. But recruiting has been an up and down roller coaster ride for them. So now Hugh Freeze comes in. He's done a great job with this class. But to flip Perry Thompson from Alabama, I guarantee you, those folks on the plains had to have been thrilled with this win. But then you just look at it again, like we talked about Aaron Scott. It's not just the win in the recruiting, it's what does this guy do for your offense? And we know that Hugh Freeze can recruit offensive players. We look at the big-bodied receivers that he got when he was at Ole Miss, Laquan Treadwell, DK Metcalf. Not saying that Perry Thompson is Laquan Treadwell or DK Metcalf, but he's that big, physical, strong receiver that Hugh Freeze covets in his offense. And the fact that they were able to take him away from their hated rival, add that Iron Bowl pizzazz and flair. The biggest question that I had, Emily, is you said he made a big splash. Just how cold was that water for Hugh Freeze? I
think got a little bit colder once the coach with the last name Freeze was thrown in there. But man, they are hot on the trail right now. That was a spectacular win for them. Nobody tells Steve Wiltfong, but I think Spatula season might be coming a little bit earlier this year because you've also got 4-star tackle Manasse Itete leaving the West Coast, flipping from USC to Florida State. He's originally from the Congo, so he'll be far from home no matter what. But a big ad for Mike Norvell. So how do you like the fit for this literally big commit?
Yeah, I mean, I love this fit. It's fascinating because all spring long, leading up until when he just about 2 days before he made the commitment to USC, I thought he was headed to Florida State. I had my original crystal ball on the Seminoles. He had taken an unofficial visit there back in the spring. His good friend Blake Nicholson out of California from that same area had signed with the Noles in the 2023 class, played for the same trainer. So I thought Florida State was in a great position to get him. Then he takes his official visit to USC. Everything swings to the Trojans. But over the last couple weeks, there was a couple tweets, kind of a little bit of cryptic tweets coming out from Manasse where you start to think this commitment is not solid to USC. He lives in California, but he is, like you said, Emily, he's not a California guy. He's originally from the Congo. So no matter where he was going to be away from home. So there's not that pull to be at USC by being in the Golden State, but there was more familiarity with Florida State. Derek Ray, who's the general manager at Florida State, originally from Central California himself. He was the big reason they got Blake Nicholson a year ago. He stayed on Manasse Itete, Alex Atkins, Mike Norvell. They stayed on it with him. And over the weekend, Florida State was able to flip the 4-star, who I think he's played 14 total high school football games. This is a kid whose best football is still going to be played, and it's probably going to be played during that time in Tallahassee.
It's all about finding that talent early, which we've seen Mike Norvell do quite a bit recruiting-wise. Finally, let's talk about Isaiah Garcia, the 4-star offensive tackle, staying home to play for Kyle Whittingham. So how do you like the fit for this big commit?
I mean, I love this fit. This is as good of a commit that Kyle Whittingham has gotten, at least in this class and in the last couple of classes. A year ago, they had a phenomenal recruiting class of linemen, not just from the state of Utah, but from other states in out west like California and Arizona. But they were able to keep Spencer Fano in state. Well, a year later, Isaiah Garcia, the #1 prospect in the state of Utah, commits to the Utes. And this was a victory for Utah. This wasn't just, hey, they got him because he's a local kid. they had to fight tooth and nail for him. He had a Final Four of Stanford, USC, Oregon, and the Utes. And in a day and age, of NIL, a lot of schools become more attracted than maybe the in-state school. Oregon and USC were making a big push for him. Stanford was trying like heck to get him, and they've had success in Utah. But these last 3 or 4 classes, we have seen such a paradigm shift in the state of Utah where in years past, Penei Sewell comes to mind, Noah Sewell comes to mind. The top player in the state of Utah left. They might have gotten 2 through 7, but now that's 2 years in a row. They've gotten the #1 player in the state. Actually, it makes it 3 years in a row, going back to Orlando Barton 2 years ago. They get an All-American and the Under Armour All-American in Isaiah Garcia. They have the top 2 players between Garcia and his teammate that he'll be protecting, Isaac Wilson. Kyle Whittingham has maintained that the key at Utah recruiting in the last few years has been to keep those key in-state kids home, and now he's done it for the 3rd straight year.
Certainly got some time to go until the December signing day, but still looks pretty good for what Kyle Whittingham has been able to do, locking down the borders in Utah. We have a few viewer questions for you, so I'm going to just go ahead and fire them at you. Tyler asking, what's the latest with the 4-star Idaho wide receiver Gatlin Bair with his impending announcement?
Well, we're 5 days away from Gatlin Bair making the much-anticipated decision. He's announcing his decision on Saturday at 5 p.m. Mountain Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And while there's a 5-school race for him with TCU, Nebraska, and Oregon in the mix, this is really down to Michigan and its Boise State. Michigan has Colston Loveland, who signed in the 2022 class. Colston Loveland's high school coach was Cameron Anderson, who is now the high school head coach of Gatlin Bair. Colston Loveland was Gatlin's host on the Michigan visit. Michigan is Michigan. They've been to the last 2 college football playoffs, won the last 2 Big Ten titles. You would think that if they can go into Idaho and get Colston Loveland 2 years ago, they could do the same thing with Gatlin Bair this year. But don't sleep on Boise State. Boise State's that one school. If you were a fan of Sesame Street in the old days, there was the old clip. One of these is not like the other. If you look at the 5 schools that are in the Final Four, or in the Final 5, you have Michigan that was in the playoffs, TCU that made it to the national championship game, Nebraska, which, they've had their run of bad luck the last couple of years, but still they do have a long history. You have Oregon, who's won a couple of Pac-12 titles in the last few years, but then you have Mountain West Group of 5 school Boise State. But it's the home state school, and Gatlin Bair has said numerous times he is seriously considered the Broncos, and I think this is down to those 2 schools, Michigan and Boise State. He just took a 2-day visit to Boise State for an unofficial this past week. He took a picture wearing the number 2 jersey, which is the famed receiver jersey at Boise State, holding a flag of the state of Idaho. In the picture, Boise State has done everything they possibly could do to keep him home. Can they pull off a stunner and keep him away from Michigan, keep him from following Colston Loveland, and land their most significant recruit maybe ever? I mean, you can go back to Kellen Moore, a former 4-star back in the day, as a pretty significant recruit, but Gatlin Bair is the highest rated prospect to ever come from the state of Idaho in the modern recruiting era. This would be the biggest win for Andy Avalos and his staff if they can pull off the upset against Jim Harbaugh. In 5 days from now, though, we'll know. Is he going with the blue blood or is he going to the blue turf?
I will say I'm having a little bit of deja vu having this conversation with you. I remember talking to the week of Elijah Rushing's commitment, the #1 edge in the country, and you said, don't sleep on Arizona. And where did he end up? Arizona. So never underestimate that home state school. We'll see what happens with Bair coming up this weekend. So I mentioned this in the headlines, but Jason wants to know, how impactful is Arizona's addition of 4-star in-state quarterback Damon Williams to their 2024 class?
Well, you just mentioned Elijah Rushing, Emily. I mean, that was a big one because of the defensive talent that he brings. But getting Damon Williams for the offensive side of the ball is huge. It's once again showing that Jedd Fisch has continued to make the state of Arizona a priority. When Damon Williams committed to Ole Miss back in, I think it was December, it made sense. Lane Kiffin had some success in those first few years at Ole Miss with quarterbacks. Damon Williams really liked the idea of playing in the SEC. Then you have the reclassification of their 2025 commit to the 2023 class, and then things start to get muddied a little bit, and Damon Williams knows that Arizona isn't going anywhere. They're going to continue to recruit him, which they did. So coming off the momentum of Elijah Rushing, which that was a high impact commitment from a ranking standpoint, from getting the #1 player, but now you get an elite quarterback from the state to stay home, to spurn the SEC, to spurn some of the other schools. Oklahoma got involved after he decommitted from Ole Miss. And now Arizona, which, shows those signs of turning that corner in 2022 with a couple of big wins, beating UCLA on the road, beating Arizona State in their rivalry game. You see what Jedd Fisch is building from a momentum program. I mean, heck, this might not be the only bit of news we were talking about with Arizona this week, with all the reports that they may be heading to the Big 12. But what they really wanted to make sure was that they continue to build a fence around the state of Arizona, especially going up against Arizona State, which is there in that Phoenix metro area. It's one thing to get Elijah Rushing from Tucson. It's another thing to go into the Phoenix area to get a Damon Williams and to get him away from an SEC school. Huge impact for Jedd Fisch on this one, not just from a PR standpoint of getting a top Arizona kid, but also you got an Elite 11 finalist and a 4-star quarterback and a guy who was a state champion and last year beat Malachi Nelson and Dylan Raiola head-to-head. That's the kind of quarterback you want on your roster, a winner.
Yeah, and you're not just bringing in highly rated prospects. These are prospects at very important positions like quarterback and edge rusher. And so these are just massive wins for Jedd Fisch on the trail. It's exciting to talk a little Arizona. We don't do a whole lot of it, but this offseason has certainly spiked up our Arizona coverage. Hannah wants to know, can Auburn use the momentum of the Perry Thompson commit to potentially swing a guy like, I don't know, maybe KJ Bolden and potential other stars to join?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we've seen in recent years in recruiting is that it just takes one recruit. There's got to be that one catalyst recruit. I mean, shoot, we just talked about what Elijah Rushing did at a school like Arizona. He gets a guy to commit. So now you get a Perry Thompson. And what does that do for some of those other targets that were maybe on the fence about Auburn, or maybe they were, Auburn was on their short list, but a lot of times it just takes, okay, is there that one big name guy that bought in? Because if he bought in, then I'm ready to buy in. We see it all the time in recruiting with coaches. Hey, I'm afraid to offer this kid, but if somebody else offers him, now I feel better about my evaluation, so we'll offer it. Recruits look at it the same way. I really like this school, but I'm not sure everybody else does. Okay, now somebody really likes them. Now I like them a lot more. And I think that that's the kind of signature recruit that turns things around. Going back to Arizona, we could talk about when Noah Fifita a couple years ago committed to Arizona. Well, that ended up being a swing to flip to Torah McMillan, who was committed to Oregon, spurned Arizona to go to USC. Now enhance that with the number 2 player in the state of Alabama, a top 2025 player in Perry Thompson. What kind of resonation could he have on other players that have Auburn on that short list to put them at the top of that list? I think this is that kind of significant recruit that could maybe open the floodgates even more. We know Hugh Freeze can recruit, but sometimes you just need that signature player, and then a bunch of other signatures follow in that footstep. So this was big for Auburn on so many levels, but to that question, I think this could be one that really throws the floodgates open.
I certainly hope when it rains, it pours. This is just the beginning for Auburn in the Hugh Freeze era. Huff, thank you so much for being on the show today. We appreciate all the great intel. You can read more of his work on 247sports.com. Also, I got a tip for you here. You will want to check out 247sports.com tomorrow. I cannot tell you exactly what's going on. It's a bit of a surprise, but trust me, just go to 247sports.com tomorrow for something very special. Speaking of special, Tallahassee may need a rebrand to Talent-Hassee. The Hall, Mike Norvell and company have been bringing in, not just through the transfer portal, but also on the trail. It's caught our attention and the attention of the college football world. So let's talk more about it and welcome in senior writer for Noles247, Chris Nee. Chris is here on the show. And Chris, you're here because there's a lot to talk about with the additions over the weekend in particular. Let's start with Charles Lester and Manasse Itete. I mean, 2 massive adds to this class. How much of an impact can these wins have for Florida State? Is they still, they're still in play for some other big-time targets?
Well, there's no doubt they've found momentum in the high school recruiting ranks. They've recruited the portal extremely well in the time of Mike Norvell and Tallahassee, but we're now seeing that translate to the high school ranks. FSU currently has 20 commits. 10 of those came in July. A lot of work done in June translated to success in July. Those 10 commitments moved FSU to 20 total commitments, number 6 over in the class. Charles Lester, Venice High School defensive back. He was a long-time target for the Seminoles. They had him on campus 9 times in his recruitment. He's a vital piece. He's the highest-ranked defensive player in FSU's class. FSU had to get him. for a few reasons. First and foremost, they were going against Colorado, and we didn't want a Travis Hunter repeat of Deion beating out his alma mater for best defensive back in the country, arguably. So that was one reason. But another reason is kind of like you were just talking about with Brandon Huffman. When you get a signature, a big-time recruit, and Charles Lester is such, other guys take notice. And a guy like KJ Bolden is one who I think Charles Lester's commitment may influence his ultimate decision that's coming here in 5 days. And then with Itete, another guy that Brandon Huffman just spoke at length about, very talented West Coast guy. He was someone that FSU felt great about back in about April, May. They got him in for a visit during the spring, and they were the leader for a long time till that first weekend in June. Took an official visit to USC, kind of quickly changed his mind, decided to go to USC. Fast forward 2 months later, switches to FSU. Offensive tackle, long-term, good, high-level player, high-ceiling kid. A little bit of a project in the sense of he hasn't played a lot of American football, but you can watch the video and see he's got the size, he's got the athleticism, he's got the length, he's got tackle potential, and there's only so many of those in the world. From an FSU perspective, he's a top-ranked offensive line commitment in their class. They also have John Daniels from Pine Forest. They have Ty Hilton from Oviedo, Florida. They're going to try to add another couple pieces from the high school ranks on the offensive line. I think somebody like Jalen Todd, who was here this past weekend, is a kid that they just went green on as far as offering. I think he could join the class. And then Zandamela, who's currently committed to USC, is another kid who I think very likely could end up in FSU's class. They're going to keep pushing for him. He's another guy kind of like Itete. They loved him. They were in a great spot in the spring. He took an early official to USC, made it kind of interesting with him committing there. But they're going to play the long game with him and see if they can pull it off in the end.
A name I did not hear you mention, but Chris, I got to ask. Jeremiah Smith. Seminole fans certainly not giving up on that dream. Neither is Mike Norvell and his staff. I mean, the 5-star Ohio State commit has taken quite a few visits to Tallahassee since his commitment to the Buckeyes. So how's the process of trying to pull off this massive flip going?
They had him back here this past weekend for Seminole Showcase. It was another multi-day unofficial visit for him. He did something similar in June where he spent about 72 hours in Tallahassee. The best thing FSU has done here, beyond just keep buying lottery tickets in the sense of keep getting him on campus, keep making an impression, is that they haven't used their official with him. And I spoke to him after his visit here this past week. He said that his official will probably be either the Miami game or around December. It kind of depends on when his team's playing for a state title, because they're a favorite in the state to play for a state title. But he wholeheartedly intends to get back to FSU, and he did tell me that if he didn't take his official for the Miami game, he would probably likely come for an unofficial. So the potential of at least 2 more visits to Tallahassee exists. Florida, Georgia, a few others are in there trying to flip him from Ohio State. I think FSU's done a phenomenal job of just laying it out, telling him we're going to have a great offense here in Tallahassee. A guy like Johnny Wilson's really good. You can play a role similar to him. He's obviously probably going to the NFL next year. Same for Keon Coleman. I think the biggest thing with Jeremiah is the connection he has with head coach Mike Norvell. He really, really likes the guy. And Mike Norvell is a guy who a lot of recruits cite as a major reason why they end up in Tallahassee. And Jeremiah Smith is one who he regularly cites him as the reason he keeps returning to Tallahassee. Got to be a tough battle. Kid likes Brian Hartline and Ohio State a heck of a lot. But you got to keep putting yourself in position. FSU's done a phenomenal job of doing just that.
Yeah, you never want to put yourself in a battle between Ohio State for a wide receiver, but certainly they are putting themselves in a great position to potentially land that flip. Let's talk about another 5-star they're in play for who actually is available, and that's the safety. You mentioned him, KJ Bolden. So where do the Noles stand with the top safety in the 2024 class?
Well, we're 5 days out from that big announcement. The best way I can put it is FSU has had a lot of confidence for, I don't know, about 6 weeks now, middle of June, when he took an unofficial visit here for a few days. They felt they did a really, really good job at that time, and they felt like that has persisted. I think from a national viewpoint, people are just catching up to that. We've heard a lot more FSU talk here nationally in the last week to 2 weeks. Auburn obviously took a really big shot this past weekend, getting them there for their big weekend. They had a lot of success there, 5-star flipping type of stuff going on. That can sometimes create momentum, and obviously that's a short jaunt from KJ Bolden's home. So I'm not going to dismiss Auburn. Georgia's been in there from the beginning, and Ohio State has family ties, and he's been there and he likes it. But FSU has a lot of confidence that they can pull that off, and I'm not dismissive of that belief. They wholeheartedly think going into the 5th that they've got a phenomenal chance of landing KJ Bolden and him being the guy that's kind of the capper in this class, where they've done a really good job of recruiting the high school ranks and killing off the narrative that they couldn't effectively do that.
Going well so far. One more prospect to hit on. In-state four-star cornerback Jamari Howard. He came in for an unofficial a few days ago. He has taken officials to Rutgers and Michigan State. He was once a Sparty commit. So what's the latest with Jamari Howard?
I feel like it's a three-team race. Michigan State, who you brought up, still in it. Florida, who he almost went to see this past weekend but decided against doing, but he's been there pretty frequently and regularly. And then Florida State. Thing with Jamari Howard, all indications we've gotten is he's not really in a rush to decide. South Florida kids tend to make an early decision, then a late decision. I think FSU's comfortable playing for that late decision, not being in a rush with him. Kind of like I mentioned with Jeremiah Smith, where they're going to try to get him in later in the process. I expect Jamari Howard to be an in-season or right after the season official visitor for Florida State. They do feel like they've done a really good job positioning themselves. He likes FSU a lot. Linebackers coach Randy Shannon, who has a lot of ties to that area, has been kind of a primary recruiter for him. He's also built a relationship with Patrick Surtain since he arrived into town, and that's played a big role with him. They're definitely in the mix. Obviously, we've talked about Charles Lester, the potential of adding KJ Bolden. You're showing a guy like Red Morgan, Rodarius Morgan, who's already in the class. They're building a pretty good defensive back group. I think Jamari Howard's a guy who's going to have a spot in that group regardless of who jumps in beforehand. But they're going to play a little bit of a long game with him. I would be surprised if we get a decision from Jamari Howard before late in the fall.
We're about to talk a lot of realignment in our next segment on the show, but while I've got you here, you actually noted on Noles247 that Florida State is, quote, actively looking to get out of the ACC. Chris, how does that happen?
Well, it's not earth-shattering news. They've had wandering eyes for a long time. The ACC, obviously, well-documented grant of rights 2036, the financial gaps that are going to exist between ACC and Big 10 teams, ACC and SEC teams, and those gaps are only going to widen here as the years pass. With FSU, they've always kind of investigated how they could go about doing it, especially since AD Michael Alford came into the building. He spoke back in February at a Board of Trustees meeting about the gaps and the issues, pointing to the financials. He reiterated his points at the May ACC spring meetings, where he was very just straightforward and somewhat aggressive with other ADs of laying it out there and letting them know how he felt and where it stood. FSU has pushed for unequal revenue sharing. The league has clearly stated they have no interest in doing that to this point in time. Jim Phillips spoke last Tuesday at ACC kickoff in Charlotte, the annual football event. Kind of seemed comfortable with the ACC being third best, which is sort of where they stand right now, but the landscape's changing. We're about to hear about the Pac-12 network, their new plans, and Big 12's obviously being very aggressive with adding teams. FSU, the ACC, it's not a marriage that's going to last. FSU wants out. It's just a matter of will it be now, will it be later. Something I documented when I wrote about that is the August 15th deadline that you're seeing there. Something we learned way back when Maryland did this, when Maryland left the league, is you have to notify the league by August 15th, the conference and its member institutions, by August 15th that you intend to leave. And that basically opens the window for you to depart the next June. If you don't do it, you're basically locked into at least the following June when you do notify. So it's basically a 10-month wait or a 22-month wait. FSU is as close as they've ever been the time I've covered them of sticking their nose out there and kind of opening the hatch and abandoning the submarine and getting out of the ACC. Now, the interesting thing to see here in the next 2 weeks, and I think obviously there's going to be a good bit of news just nationally with realignment still, is does FSU go forward and do it? Do they do it by themselves? Do they do it in unison with somebody like Clemson, who obviously holds similar power to FSU within the ACC? And if they do it, who's their dancing partner? Where are they going to end up landing? I've long thought the Big Ten would be the more likely of the two, of Big Ten or SEC, but I'm not locked into the belief that that's the only option. I think they do have options, but I obviously don't think they're going to do it if they don't have a good idea of where they are going to land.
Very interesting stuff. Chris, thank you so much for breaking it all down. Let's go ahead on his way out. Thank you, Chris. Hit that thumbs up button. Say you like the segment, you like the show. It makes us feel very nice. Also, go to this awesome website, Noles247.com. This is clearly just the beginning for a very exciting cycle for Mike Norvell and company. So check it out for Seminoles recruiting and, as he mentioned, potential realignment news. And speaking of, Colorado is leaving the Pac-12, in case you missed it. Yeah, they're headed back to the Big 12. The Buffs originally left in 2011 to join the Pac, and in 2024, it's back to the Big 12. A slightly new look Big 12, to say the least. And so when it's time to talk Prime, we got to bring in this guy.
Carl Reed with 24/7 Sport.
That means they don't take breaks if they 24/7.
Around the clock.
What's good for the goose
It's good for the gander. You in the class of 2024, you better stop playing around and make a decision. And I go in there with my wife, and Mike Norvell is talking to a bunch of recruits, and he's got it pumping, he's got it going on. I leave the room with Dan Lannon, but my wife stays in the room with Mike Norvell, and I thought she was gonna get in the transfer portal. If they are gonna be recruiting every day, you better be working every day, and that's the real deal.
Dr. Reed is like Nate Dogg. You know it's a hit when he spit.
It is time to read between the lines with our national college football analyst, Carl Reed. But with something this major, we are also bringing in Adam Munster-Tiger of Buff Stampede. Adam, I'm going to start with you here. Coach Prime has already proven that he can recruit nationally, as evident by what he's been doing this offseason. But now you're joining a conference in some very talent-rich states. So what impact will this move have on Colorado recruiting?
Well, what's crazy is you've already seen Colorado's recruiting start to trend back to more of the Big-12 footprint. Even before making this announcement, they were having a hard time getting some of the guys that they were getting out of California to produce in those classes. And so you saw between the 2020 class and the 2022 class, they actually signed 19 guys out of Texas, just 9 out of California. So it really is where Colorado recruiting was kind of trending anyways. And yeah, they've pulled guys from Oklahoma. And now with Coach Prime coming on board, obviously his ties to Texas and Florida is going to be big. And it's not just Coach Prime. So many of the guys, the majority of the guys on his staff have that history recruiting more in either the South or the Big 12. They just, outside of Brett Bartolone, didn't have a lot of experience on this coaching staff from the Pac-12 footprint.
So you hear what he has to say about how it affects the recruiters, but how about the recruits? How does all this conference realignment and figuring out what conference you're eventually going to play and affect a player's decision?
Well, you know, Emily, that when you're Deion and you're going to recruit Texas and you're going to recruit the state of Florida, what that means for the recruits is now they know and understand that they're going to get to play in front of their family members sometimes. Yeah. And that is also huge in realignment, and it's huge when players are picking schools that they're going to play for. You have Central Florida in that league from Florida. You have all of the Texas schools in the Big 12. So now you know they're already recruiting Texas and Florida heavily. Now those guys are going to get to play a few games a year in front of their friends and family, and that also is big in recruiting.
Yeah, Ohio often not talked about as much with Big 12, as Cincinnati is new to that league. But of course, Ohio has some great recruiting as well. And so, yeah, you just kind of expand everything. If we've still got Adam here. Yeah, Adam, I want to ask, we tend to put a lot of stock into the fact that the Pac-12 still doesn't have its TV deal solidified. We had some recent news come out that they are potentially going to announce it to their members within the next 48 hours. So we might get some resolution. It feels like something that we in the media talk about a lot is this big deal. But how much do you think that that's actually a topic of conversation among the recruits and those recruiting them?
Well, at the start, I think it becomes a bigger topic if the future of the Pac-12 becomes more in peril, because I think the Pac-12 is one more school, one more defection away from being in real trouble. And that's where it starts to hit living rooms in terms of parents not really wanting to necessarily send their son to a Pac-12 school with the question marks out there. That's part of why Colorado left, was that stability. They knew that roughly $32 million number was there for them. And from everything they had heard, and we'll find out when the number finally gets released here, but it doesn't sound like the Pac-12's number is going to be there. So if you're Colorado, you look to stability, and recruits and their parents are going to like that stability as well. Now, I wouldn't necessarily bury the Pac-12 yet. We'll see what George Kliavkoff is able to do. It just doesn't look great right now. And I think Colorado, with all the information they had in front of them, had to make the decision that they did.
I think that when you look at the way that the Pac-12 situation is affecting recruiting, the SEC and the Big 10, they've made some huge statements, and everybody knows who they're going to be playing against, how much money, how much television time. The Pac-12 has a big dilemma right now because nobody really knows what's going on there. And so as teams start to exit the league, teams going to the Big 10, teams going to the Big 12, the Pac-12 does have to do something to help solidify their programs. Oregon is a national brand, so I think it affects them probably the least because kids are always going to be excited about going to Oregon. But a program like Utah, who has built really on the West Coast in the Samoan Islands and things like that. They have to do something for those programs to let the recruits know that there's some stability there.
Yeah, I think it's what both of you guys are saying is it's more just the general uncertainty and the kind of chaos surrounding the Pac-12 right now. I doubt that a lot of recruits are all that concerned with TV deals, but it's just the general, what's the future of the conference that I could potentially be playing in. Let's actually hear from Colorado's athletic director, Rick George, on the impending move to the Big 12.
Let me state that this move was not just based on money or finances. A decision this big has a lot more to do than just money. At the forefront of our minds in all of our decisions is our student athletes and their experience as Buffs. We've done our analysis, and they'll be traveling less in the Big 12, playing in more favorable time slots where we believe they can get greater national exposure and return to Boulder after away games at earlier times.
All right, Adam, we know about the Big Two. You mentioned it with the Big 10 and the SEC, but there seems to be maybe a race between the Big 12 and the ACC for that number 3 spot. So how does this move affect the Big 12's standing, bringing in Colorado in the overall college football landscape?
I think some of that is yet to be determined. And if you have some of these former group of 5 type schools, a Houston, a UCF going to a Big 12, if they're able then with that elevated status of at the current time being a Power 5 type program, and that elevates their recruiting, I think that does start to put the Big 12 on a little bit a better footing in terms of making that debate that we might be the 3rd best conference. But you're going to have some of those schools that the Big 12 has taken from smaller markets and have them really elevate their game from recruiting. And, Colorado's going to be one of them once they get into the conference next year and being able to build on all of the talent that Coach Prime has brought to Boulder so far. So it's going to be up to them as well to kind of elevate the overall prestige of the conference.
Now, you still have to consider the ACC a little bit ahead of the Big 12 because you have programs like Clemson, who has won national championships. Florida State has national championships. Miami has national championships. So with the Big 12 losing Texas and Oklahoma, Adam is right. It's a wait and see thing. Can the teams in the Big 12 get into an expanded playoff that we're going to see and compete for national championships? That's going to be the deciding factor of who is the next best conference after the SEC and the Big 10.
Certainly a lot of different angles that we can hit on with this, but Adam, you have been so generous with your time. I know you are super busy right now covering all of this, so thank you for being on the show today. You can check out more of his work at Buff Stampede. In case you forgot, a Deion Sanders-led Colorado team is yet to actually play a down of football, and yet we've had more news this offseason than some programs have had over the span of decades. So it is crucial that you are routinely refreshing Buff Stampede for all things Colorado. Okay, before we hit on the recruit of the weekend, there's actually another recruit making headlines this weekend. But first, I have to explain why Carl is still at this desk, explain his credentials. You know that he knows everything when it comes to football, but he is also quite a bit of a grill master, and he constantly sends us these videos of him on the grill, making the most delicious food possible. What are you supposed to do when this comes to your phone and you're 4 hours away and you can't eat it? Carl, explain to us what grilling means to you, and I'll explain why we're explaining this.
Well, I'm one of the best in the country.
Yeah.
Myself, my wife, my aunts, my mom, our family. And so we're really good at it, Emily. I just don't know football. I also do know barbecue. I can compete on any level at it.
Renaissance man. So the whole reason that we're establishing this on a football show is that we need you to comment on this photo that was posted by Elijah Dotson over the weekend. This is his spread from Michigan's Big Cookout Visit Weekend. This is one of the biggest weekends that they have in the recruiting calendar. There are many places that you can take this, but your eyes really go to those little chicken thins there. But I'm a little concerned about the shape of the hot dog bun. Carl, I just wanted to know your official comment on this food that they're serving to recruits.
They've been getting killed about this. This picture today is going viral. We do know now, though, why Jim Harbaugh bought those kids those hamburgers that day, because this is not a really good thing. The only thing that I'll say about this, they call that a struggle plate on social media. if you get on Twitter after dark and you see that, they'll call that a struggle play. My Aunt Charmaine is located in Detroit. I can send her up to Michigan the next time they have some guys up, and she'll make sure that they're squared away and that they're eating a little bit better.
You would never serve that, right, Carl?
No, I couldn't do that.
Okay. But should we be asking questions, though? I mean, Michigan's having quite a bit of success. So
well, we're late in the summer, so we've
Yeah.
never seen that before out of Michigan. Maybe their main cook might have been on vacation.
We'll see. Carl, you do it all. Thanks so much for being here.
This guy is a blur on tape. He zigs and zags.
You see size, you see length, you see athleticism.
He's a player that has that opportunity to potentially make an impact from day one.
It is our recruit of the weekend coming to us from Fairfax, Virginia, Kristopher Jones. The four-star linebacker made his college decision over the weekend, picking Georgia over Florida and Michigan State. The Bulldogs landing the number 10 linebacker in this cycle, and Jones's pledge marks 26 commitments in the top class in the country. Plus, you pair him with fellow linebacker commit and five-star Justin Williams. Not too shabby a haul for the Dogs here at linebacker on the trail. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you for the likes. I hate to ask for more, but I'm going to. Go ahead and hit that like button on the way out. Make sure you are subscribed to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. August is upon us, which means the season is almost here. So thanks again for joining us. I'm Emily Proud, and this is the College Football Recruiting Show.